so excited to hear about her mission. God told her to go and she said yes. And so she is here along with Luke and the boys. And she is here tonight to share with us all of the things that they have planned and what got her here and where we're going. So, Kelly.
Thank you, Jane. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm doing good so far then. So I have to confess to you first that when Jane first asked me to speak tonight, I was so nervous, and that this is my first public speaking engagement, and usually Luke gets to do these things and I'm quite happy with that. I'll just stay in the background and let him just do that, and I'm happy to do all the other work. But yeah, I was nervous, but I'm just so grateful for everything that everyone at Moorestown Church has done for us since before we even got here. So I'm really glad to be able to give back in some way, and hopefully that will be good and not too boring for you. I especially want to say thank you to Linda. I know she's on tonight, and I know that Linda has put in so much effort, even organising all of the things that people have done for us, from donating furniture and giving toys to the kids, and even just Linda and Philip taking us out for the day and stuff. And I'm really grateful for you, Linda, and for Philip. Excuse me. Now, to show you, here's a picture of the boys with some of the donations that you gave early on when we first got here. And I have to tell you, they've been growing so much. Here's them in the summer, getting cheeky, as always. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is my mum. So today is my mum's birthday. She's 58 today. She's been unwell for like the last week, so she hasn't even done much. She said she went to Lidl's and got herself a cookie. So it's been a bit of a boring birthday for her, but I wanted to share with you some of the things that my mum has always said to me, and some of them are things that would drive me mad and I wish she wouldn't say, but a lot of the things that she said have really inspired me, like in the back of my mind, without me even knowing, to take the opportunities that I've been given. And like tonight, this feels like a big opportunity for me, and that's kind of how I ended up with UrbanPromise, by taking opportunities and listening to all those things that my mum would say. So this is a picture of my mum and dad. It's quite an old one. You'll probably be able to tell as my mum's hair colour changes through the pictures that I'm sharing. This is at my aunt's wedding. So one of the things that people say where I'm from is, oh my God. And I come from like the edge of East London and Essex border, and it's a place that doesn't really have a good reputation. And there's this kind of characterization of people, and people will laugh at them on TV and making jokes about how people always say, oh my God, all the time. And it's like become a bit of a thing. There's even this fish and chip shop called Oh My Cod, which is just around the corner from my parents' house. They're using it for good marketing. So people always assume, speaking of God, that I've grown up in church because they know that Luke's a pastor and they know that we're doing work with UrbanPromise. So I think they just assume I've always been a Christian. But actually, even though I heard this, oh my God, all the time, all around me growing up, I didn't really become a Christian until I was 19. But I think it began a lot earlier than that, with my kind of connection to God. When I was about 8 years old, my grandmother moved into the area where we were living in Barking and Dagenham, and she'd always lived far away, and my mum and my grandmother weren't very close. My mum had actually been raised by her grandmother, and she lived local, and we spent a lot of time with her, but not with my mum's mum. So when she moved into the area, it was like a new opportunity to get to know her, and I started spending a lot more time with her. And on Sundays, she would always go to the local Catholic church. So I'd stay over at the weekends, and on Sunday, she would take me along to this Catholic church called St. Peter's. And I really fell in love with it, and I loved all of the rituals that I could participate in. Like, I loved to go and light a candle and say a prayer, and I had 2 sets of rosary beads, and I just remember that was like my first introduction to God and to faith. So I went with my grandmother a few times, but then she moved away again shortly after, and my mum had never gone to church and my dad hadn't. So I said to my mum, I really like going to church. I want to go back, even though my grandmother wasn't around anymore. So my mum started taking me reluctantly, but she took me. And, you know, she never really felt welcome there. The people were never very friendly, but she knew I wanted to go. So she took me along, and then I decided I wanted to get baptized and have my first Holy Communion, which I ended up doing on the same day when I was about 9 years old. That's me on the right at the top there. So yeah, my mum took me along to church, and I ended up having my baptism and Holy Communion. And I went to a Catholic high school. We start high school at age 11 in England. So it was still an important thing for me. So I went to this Catholic high school, but because my family weren't churchgoers and they weren't that interested, and once I got to high school and I started to get distracted with the whole big change of going to high school, I think I just kind of drifted away and started to forget all about that connection that I'd felt as a kid. My mum, having not been that welcomed at the church, didn't really have any inclination to try and convince me to keep going. So I just sort of drifted away from church altogether. This is a picture of my high school. I remember at high school, my religious education classes, and I remember kind of feeling a bit of that connection to the stories that we were taught, stories about Jesus. I remember studying Mark's Gospel for one of our exams, and I think that always stuck in my mind, but because there wasn't much faith around me otherwise, I had drifted away. But then when I was 19, I went to the local community college, and I was studying art and design and photography, but I went on to photography later. And I had a part-time job at a retail store called French Connection. I don't know if you have that here. It just sounds European anyway, doesn't it? But when I was working there was this girl who started a while after me, and she was a similar age. She knew my cousin, so we kind of got talking, and we'd had quite a few shifts together. So we ended up spending quite a bit of time together, and honestly, I found her really annoying. And she went to this church, and it's all she seemed to talk about. And I hadn't had any connection with church since I'd left when I went to high school at 11. So I was now 19, and I met this girl, and we worked together, and she just would always be talking about church. And it sounded so different to the experience of church that I had had that I just wanted to keep asking her about it. And she was on the worship team. She was a youth worker. She did everything that you could possibly do in church. And I just thought that her life sounded a bit crazy. And so I just kept asking her everything about church and about her faith. And it reminded me of what I had learned at church as a kid. And I was just fascinated that it sounded so different to my experience, but also that there was a lot of similarities with the faith. And I think in the end, she got bored of all my questions and decided to give in and invite me along to church. So we went along to church, and yeah, she invited me, and it was an evening service. This is oh, hang on, sorry. This is a picture of the church. It used to be called Bethel. It's now called London's Riverside Church, and it looks very different to that picture there, but that's what it looked like when I first went there. Excuse me. I'm not used to talking this much. So I remember she invited me. It was an evening service, and I was so nervous that I actually parked like 2 roads away. I wouldn't go into the church car park. I thought, if I go into the car park, I'll get stuck with all the Christians, and then I won't be able to escape if I don't like it. So I parked 2 roads away, and then I walked really slowly up to the church so that I had time to change my mind in case I didn't want to go in the end. But I made it to the door and I got in, even though it was really intimidating. And I think sometimes, even now, I feel quite intimidated going into a new church, and just that feeling of like a whole group of people that know each other and you feeling like the outsider. And that's definitely what I felt the first time that I went along to church. But I went in and it was a service about the Alpha course. I think you do the Alpha course here. It's like a course where you can go and ask all your questions, and I still had plenty of questions, even though I've been invited along to church to ask someone else. So I was asked at the end of the service, did I want to sign up to this Alpha course? And it was my first time at church, and I felt like I couldn't really say no. I didn't want to offend anybody, so I was like, okay, I'll sign up, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. So I went along and I was just as nervous, but I managed to park in the car park this time. And the guy that was doing the food was actually a chef, and I think that really helped me to stay and to feel more comfortable because the food was so good. So I remember just feeling relaxed and being in that place with a group of people where the whole point was to ask questions, because I just felt there were so many questions in my mind about faith and God and the different experience that I'd had at this church compared to when I was a child. So yeah, I really enjoyed being there. And after a few weeks, somebody asked me, oh, have you decided, do you want to become a Christian? And I thought, well, this is all going very fast, but why not? Why not just try becoming a Christian? And I know that sounds really silly, really, but I've just been learning, and I thought, well, what would stop me? I don't really have anything to lose, but I thought maybe that there was a lot to gain by just trying, and I could always just change my mind if I thought that it was weird or I didn't want to be a Christian or whatever. So after hearing people say, oh my God, so many times around me, growing up, I finally had a chance to get to know this God, and he became a person to me rather than just a saying that people from where I'm from say and that others look down upon. Excuse me. But I still had a lot of questions, even after doing the Alpha course and having a specific time for questions. So I thought, what am I going to do with my questions now? I don't have this Alpha course to go to. So in short, I applied to Bible college. So I thought that was a sensible thing to do if you had questions about God. And somehow they let me in. And I was telling Sandy the other day that when I first got to Bible college, one of my first classes was about evangelicalism. And I remember thinking, what have I done? I don't even know what an evangelical is. And I can just say I had a lot of reading to do, but I managed it and I did all right. And now I know what an evangelical is, I think. But I loved being in a place where I could just ask my questions about God and get to know him more with other people that also wanted to find out more about God. And then I happened to get a degree as well, so that worked out well. But it was challenging for me at the same time, because it was the first time that I truly mixed with people that were from different backgrounds to me. And I'd grown up in Barking and Dagenham, which is a very working class area. And this was a first time that I was with more middle class and upper class people that I just hadn't really mixed with before. So sometimes that was quite hard, but I did meet some of my best friends there, one of them being Luke, who's now my husband, and this is us at our graduation when we looked quite a bit younger. Oh, excuse me. So in our second year at Bible college, we went to this talk that was being given by this organisation from the States called UrbanPromise. And I'd not heard of them before, but Luke had been to one of their talks when he was studying in Manchester before we met at LST. And I'd heard that they worked in the inner city in the States, and being from the inner city, I thought, well, maybe I'll feel a bit more normal with these people because I felt so different around everyone else at college, and maybe I can find something there that I can connect to. So I went along, and there was a team from Wilmington sharing about what they do and what they do with their young people. They brought some of their street leaders along who shared their stories, and they were trying to recruit summer interns, but I just fell in love with everything that they were saying. And it felt, I just remember thinking, why didn't I have that when I was growing up, and how different my life would be if I had people there that wanted to help me learn who I am and what I'm good at and guide me and help me grow as a person. And I just loved everything that they were saying and decided I'm just going to go and work for them forever. And I don't know how I thought I was going to do that, but I decided it. So I listened to every word that they said, and then I cried a lot. And then I went to tell Luke all about it, because he hadn't come because he'd been before. So, and I think he suspected that that might happen anyway. So Luke and I talked about it. We got in touch with the people at Wilmington to see if we could maybe go and work there once we graduated, and they were really open about it. And that was quite a surprise, because I thought, oh, they're going to think we're crazy just saying, yeah, we loved what you said, can we just come and work for you? They just was really open and talked about different things that we might be able to come and do. And the problem was we just got engaged, and we were getting married a month after our graduation. So we thought perhaps it's not the best idea to get married, graduate, get married, and then move to another country. So we got in contact with them, and we said, actually, we're having to rethink this. That's too many things at once. And the person that we've been in touch with said to us, oh yeah, that's fine, you know, just get married, have a couple of kids, and then get in touch with us in a few years. And I just thought that was the weirdest thing that you could ever say to anybody. And I thought, oh, maybe that was a good idea, we didn't go. And what, like, who even said I wanted kids? What are they talking about? So I just laughed so much at the idea of having kids and then moving to another country into the inner city to do this kind of work. So we got married, and Luke got a job as a pastor, and we kind of settled into that part. We moved to a different part of London, so we settled in there. And then we had kids. That's, you know, and now here we are in the inner city in another country with our kids, just as was suggested to us before. So, you know, I always think God must be having a bit of a laugh with me after I had laughed so much at that suggestion of doing that. And now here I am doing exactly what the person suggested to me, although it's Camden, not Wilmington. And that's us with Lester, who runs Good Promise Ministries in Malawi. So another thing my mum says is, if you want something done properly, then do it yourself. This is my mum at our wedding talking to my grandmother that I was speaking about earlier. So every now and then, Luke and I, after we laughed about that suggestion, Luke and I would remember the conversation and, you know, oh, remember when they said that? I wonder what would have happened if we'd have gone instead of staying and working here, or what would have happened if we'd gone straight after getting married. So we'd come back to thinking about it. And I remember when they gave the talk at college, they gave me a leaflet, and I kept that leaflet until before we moved here, and I had to clear out my house. So every now and then I would just look at it and think, oh, I remember what those guys were doing. It was so amazing. And I wonder if I'll ever find anything like that in the UK. And we would look, but nothing ever really matched up to UrbanPromise for us. And there are some really good organisations in the UK, but they're just not UrbanPromise. And I just felt there's something special about UrbanPromise that I really connected to. So after Luke had been working for our last church for about 6 years, and the kids were getting bigger, I started to think about what we might do long term. And we'd always thought that we wanted to work together. But I'd been a stay-at-home mum since having the kids, and the thought of going back to work just sounded so overwhelming. And I thought, if I'm going to go back to work, it's got to be something that I absolutely love, and not, I mean, because I had the privilege of being able to stay at home with the kids at first, and I thought, it's going to be difficult. I've got to love what I'm doing, even if I start at the bottom. And it kind of felt overwhelming. So we'd talk about what would we really want to do if we could do anything. And then the Grenfell Tower fire happened. I don't know if anybody saw that in the news. The tower just went up in flames and the people inside were stuck. And it turned out that the manufacturers, when doing the building, had taken a shortcut, and the cladding wasn't the correct cladding, which is why it set fire and spread so quickly. And they'd used that cladding to save money, and that's how the fire spread. They'd chosen to save money instead of thinking about saving lives long term. And Grenfell Tower is in the London borough of Chelsea, which is one of the richest boroughs in London. But there are also pockets of really high poverty in Chelsea, and the really rich live right next door to the really poor. And I thought about what happened when I saw this on TV in the news, and the injustice of the people that were living there just because they weren't valued as much as their wealthy neighbours, because they didn't have the money and the voice to be able to protect themselves living in the government housing. And there were stories on the news about different individuals that had died in the building and the kinds of things that they were doing, the talents that they had and the skills. And there was just all these stories about these amazing people coming out. And I just thought how their life had just disappeared in an instant because of somebody trying to save money. And I think the thing that shocked me the most was seeing other people's reaction to the news. And because I was living in an affluent area in the suburbs at that time, I felt like it was a very different reaction, because I would talk to people about it and how sad it was, but then the conversation would be done, we'd be moving on to the next thing. And I just felt like people didn't see what was really going on. To me, it felt like the biggest thing. And every time I saw it on TV, I couldn't stop crying. And then even in the day, I'd start thinking about it and just start crying. And it felt like really deep for me. And obviously, I'm not saying that how I felt is at all related to how people that lived in there felt, or some of people's loved ones. I can't imagine how they were feeling, but I just felt like an overwhelming sadness about it. And I was pretty annoyed that other people weren't just crying about it all the time, which sounds really stupid, but people seem to move on from it pretty quickly, but I just couldn't. So I didn't know what my problem was until I spoke to one of my neighbours, and I realised that the reason it was bothering me so much and why I felt so sad was because for me, that could have easily been me or somebody that I loved, because me and my neighbour had grown up in the same kind of area, although we didn't know each other before we'd lived in the suburbs. And we had grown up in places just like Grenfell. And I never lived in a high-rise tower like that, but lots of my friends did, and people that I knew growing up. And I think it made it feel all the more real to me, whereas for a lot of people, they hadn't ever even been to a place like that or seen what it was like inside one of these kind of flats. So I think that realization that it wasn't that they weren't sad about it, but that they couldn't relate to it in the same way, it kind of helped me stop being judgmental to everybody else for a start, and stop, I realized why everyone else wasn't crying about it all the time. And it brought me back to thinking about, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And what am I going to do long term? And I thought about what my mum would always say to me, that if you want something done properly, you should do it yourself. So that then brought me back to thinking about UrbanPromise. And I just knew, and I decided that is what I want to do. I need to do that in my city because of things like this, like Grenfell Tower. Like, people are still living under that injustice, whether there's a tower burning to remind us of that or not. So I'd made up my mind, and I knew that I'd need to do it myself, but I kind of was wondering how am I going to do that? And I thought about how much of an outsider I felt at college because of where I was from, and how there were just so many careers that I didn't even know about until I was in my 30s. And I was living in the suburbs, and I met people that had different jobs that I'd never even heard about, like HR. I'd never even heard of that growing up because I just didn't know people with those kind of jobs. And I wonder what kind of things I might have been more open to if I'd have known what the options were that were out there for me, and I'd had someone to guide me. Like, I remember the UrbanPromise model and the people that were talking shared with us. So this is London, the view from Barking and Dagenham looking into central London. London has a child poverty rate of 39%. And I don't think people ever really think of London as having poverty. They think of Buckingham Palace and Houses of Parliament and all of the tourist things, but it actually has a child poverty rate of 39%. And where I grew up and where we're going back to in Barking and Dagenham is actually at 50% for that small area. So when Luke and I came back to our conversations about what to do with our lives, and we prayed and talked a lot about it and about UrbanPromise, and we felt like God was reminding us of Isaiah 61, which, Jane, if you're still okay to read it, I'll put it up on the screen.
Claim freedom.
I just realized I did that with being muted. I'll start again. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations.
Thank you.
Restore and renew.
So after Luke and I were first reminded of that scripture, which I think the people from Wilmington actually shared with us all those years ago, but once we were reminded of it again, it just started coming up everywhere. And I don't know if that happens to anyone else when you're praying about something and God speaks to you through scripture. It just felt like it was at every church visit that we went to, they were reading this scripture, everything that we read, any podcast that we listened to, and we couldn't really escape it. So we thought maybe God is trying to tell us something. I just want to read this verse 4 again, because this is really foundational for us in starting UrbanPromise UK. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. So I was convinced about my mum's words that if I want something done properly, I should do it myself. And I now knew what I wanted to do, and I had in my mind, I want UrbanPromise in London. I want to rebuild and restore and renew the place that I am from and the devastation that I have seen growing up and with the people around me. But I still wasn't really sure how to go about that, which leads me to another thing my mum says: if you don't ask, you don't get. This one annoyed me so much growing up because I was such a shy child, and my mum would always say this to me to try and get me to be a bit more confident, and you just go and ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And I'd be like, oh, I wish you wouldn't say that, but now I know it's actually got some value, so I'm grateful. So in light of everything that happened and thinking about Grenfell and deciding what we wanted to do, how were we going to find a way to make it happen? So the most logical thing to us was, let's go on UrbanPromise's website and just see what jobs they've got. let's see if they've got a job and we can just apply for a job and see what happens. So we went onto Camden's website and we had a look for some jobs. And we thought, yeah, we'll get a job and we can learn how they do this and then maybe just bring it home. And we had no idea that there was a fellowship program. So Luke found the job and applied for it. And he didn't hear anything. So we were like, oh no, what are we going to do now? Because that was like our only way in. So he phoned up Pam Fox, who's amazing and does all HR at Camden. And he said, oh, I know the deadline's gone and I didn't get like asked for an interview. So I just wanted to check what I could improve on next time and what happened and all of that. So he ended up in a nice chat with Pam. And he said, well, actually, you know, what me and my wife really want to do is just start an UrbanPromise in London. And we thought that if we applied to the job, that might be a good way to learn how to do it and see if we can maybe do that later on. So she said, oh, there's actually a program for that. And she told Luke all about the fellowship program and said that she'd connect us with Bruce. So she gave us Bruce Main's email and we emailed Bruce. And it sounds so silly when I say it out loud to people. We just emailed him and said, we'd like to start an UrbanPromise in London and we've just heard about your program. So he said, well, I'm actually in London in a few weeks' time for 24 hours in between flights. So let's meet up for a coffee. We were like, oh, okay. So we took the kids into central London and we met up with Bruce. He literally just got into London from his flight. And we met for a coffee and had a chat. And he told us to apply for the fellowship. And this is a photo that Bruce took that day. You can see Judah's got a little bit better at smiling. But yeah, this is that day that we met Bruce for the coffee. And it makes it all sound really simple, like we just met for coffee and then ended up here. But there was obviously a lot more stress in between that coffee and getting here, not to mention selling up all of our stuff and moving our kids across the Atlantic in the middle of a pandemic. So that's a simple story that we met for a coffee and now we're here. So now that we're here and we're both fellows, I think people wonder like what we actually do. So as part of what we do is learning from the other fellows that we're with. We have placement hours. So this is a picture of all camp day. So we do camp all over summer and some of the after school camp. We do different hours like volunteering either in the school or at camp, or sometimes Sandy gets stuck with us in the UPI office. We have different trainings on Fridays. We get given mentors and we also are studying for our masters in organisational leadership. I'm doing that out of me and Luke because just one of us was enough. And during all of that, we also work on a proposal for the UPI board to tell them what we want to do back in our countries and what our plan is and how we're going to set up UrbanPromise. So the UrbanPromise International Board approved UrbanPromise UK in May 2021. It's hard to remember the years now, isn't it? Hard enough to know what year we're in with COVID. So now that we're registered in the UK, and we've got a wonderful board of trustees already, and we're working on our fundraising and putting together program plans whilst I finish up my studies as well. And I'm graduating in May, and we're heading home just a few days later on the 10th of May. So we're going to start in September recruiting our first street leaders. And from September to December, we're going to be focusing on training those street leaders. We're going to start with just 6 and just spend time with just them, getting to establish a culture together and training them for starting after school program in January. And then in July 2023, we'll have our first summer camp. Although our summer is quite a bit shorter back home, we just get 6 weeks off of school rather than, is it like 2.5 months here, isn't it? So it will look a little bit different. But being the first UrbanPromise in the UK, I don't think many people really know the impact that the programs can make because they haven't seen it yet. And as a new organisation, we've got quite a way to go before people will be able to see and understand how Urban Promise and the model that Urban Promise has can really make a difference. And as we don't have anything to show them yet, we're kind of relying on their trust in us and in what the other Urban Promises have done before us. And I think that's why your support is so valuable to us, and everything that you've done to support us whilst we've been here, because nobody back home really knows what it's all about yet. So we'd love for you to just stay connected with us and stay in touch and support us in any way that you can whilst we're building our reputation back home and showing people how much difference and impact it will really make in their communities. You can stay in touch with us. I'll send a link in the chat after if I can work out how to do that. And we value your prayer and your partnership. And obviously we're still fundraising. So far we've reached 72% of our startup budget, which feels like a really big achievement. And we're hoping that we can reach 100% before we return home. So it's a good job I listen to my mum, sometimes at least. I'm sure she'll tell you I don't. And I'm glad that we felt brave enough to ask and to take the opportunities. And now that we get to bring Urban Promise back to our city and be a part of the restoration that I believe that God is going to bring there. So thank you so much for listening to me, and just thank you for the opportunity to share with you a bit of my life story as well. And I would love to hear your thoughts, and if your mum said those things to you as well, any similar experiences that you've had with your faith. And I hope that this honours my mum on her birthday too, and that she can inspire you.
Kelly, thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, if you put them in the chat, I can ask them so that we're not inundating her with lots of questions all at one time. The only one I had so far you've answered. It was how we can support you when you get back to London. Where are you going to be having Urban Promise?
So we're starting in Barking and Dagenham, which is a borough of London where I grew up. It's just on the east part of London, next to the Essex county. Getting all my words mixed up now.
Jane, how about if we put back the screen where all the people are and they can also see Kelly in that group?
Okay, now I can.
Aha.
Is that better?
Depends on what you've done to your computer.
I stopped sharing, so hopefully you shouldn't be able to see it.
Okay, if you go into gallery view, you can see pretty much everybody that's there.
Yeah.
Oh, here's one question. Let's see. Will the street leaders be high schoolers from the neighborhood?
Yeah. So we're starting in a community called Maxted, which is a small part of Barking and Dagenham. And it's kind of cut off from the rest of the town because there's a highway in the middle and then all around it is fields. So the people that live there are really cut off from everybody else. So I think we really want to be able to get the street leaders from that community so that the younger children can have them as role models in their community, especially being cut off. I think it's really important that they're all in that same place.
And another question, how have your kids liked it here? Do they find things strange or different?
I think, you know, like talking to them about getting ready to go home, I think they maybe feel like they've just started to get used to being somewhere different. And there's so many things that we love about being here, and we've been able to do like amazing things, and we go to a lot of the museums in Philadelphia a lot, and I think they're really going to miss doing all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think now that they've just settled and we're moving them again, so they're going to be a bit annoyed about that.
Okay.
In terms of what they find strange or different, I can tell you I had a little argument with Ruben, who's our older son, the other day about noodles. I made him chicken noodle soup because on the packet it said noodles, and I was like, these are noodles. And he said to me that it was pasta. So I said, no, it says noodles. In America, this is noodles. Those are the things.
Chicken noodle soup is about the most American soup you can have.
That's what
In-
I thought.
In the chat, everybody, is the link to Urban Promise UK, in case you're wondering how to get to it. Where will you be living when you get back?
That's our biggest problem, that we don't have anywhere to live yet. So we're going to have to move in with my parents. They have 2 spare rooms, but their house is quite small. And I don't have any siblings, so they've been on their own a long time, and us 4 are invading their space until we find somewhere to live. So I definitely appreciate prayers for that. Thank you.
Well, all of your questions are probably going to come to you after we have gone. However, we know where to find Kelly, so we can ask them later if we need to.
Thank you.
Kelly, this has been very different. It kind of tells us of a different place, even showing the fire and how much damage that did in one of the worst parts of the neighborhood. And yet the rest of the neighborhood was not touched. It's strange. And yet probably we could think some ways that that happens in this country as well.
Mm.
And Kelly, God really had a plan for you, because you started from the very beginning, you started thinking about this, or he was trying to tell you, look, listen to me. This is what I want you to do. You kept seeing it in all these places and hearing it over and over again. And finally, the light bulb went on, but you're still very, very young. So you're going to have a lot of impact on a lot of people in London, and God bless you all for that. It's been a pleasure having you here. I wish we could have gotten to know you a little bit better, but you're a very busy young mother, as well as an intern at Urban Promise. But I hope you can take everything back with you and build a wonderful program there in London. Oh, I can't wait to see it in writing about you and Luke and the boys. So
If you haven't already joined our Facebook page, please be sure you do, and then we'll be looking for posts from you.
I will do.